Okay, I think we're ready to get started, everybody. So we're going to move into our, building out the rest of the team, right? How are we going to actually build out and hire for the rest of our C-level team, right? Our boards have put a fearless team in, which we've all figured out what the definition is. This last week, we make sure we have a team that's built that knows how to produce revenue. They've proven a revenue success and that they understand communication. And then we move forward. So let me just adjust that. You don't need to see me. We're going to talk about the 5 areas that we see the most amount of friction in new hires. And it usually always revolves around the pace of an organization or the pace of success, the pod, the position of the person, how they validate data, and finally what their compass is. Let's jump in and explain those a little bit more. So the first is your pace. When you think back in history on your pace, and when you're asking a candidate to go through a story and tell you a story, listen to what their pace was. Was it dynamic or was it constant? Not meaning the speed. I'm not saying they didn't go fast or they went slow. I'm thinking about, was their success throughout a time of constant or in a high change? Think 2008, a good example of high change. Were they going through, were they successful at that time? Then think about when they won, was it primarily around they won with a team of other people around them, or was it that they only won because they were in a team? Both are good. And then our position is the communicator, right? Or implementer. Can you do, again, no right or wrong? And we're going to go through these in more detail, but when they go through validation, do they look at process or people? Data to validate if their decisions are right, or people? And then compass is, do they look internally or externally? So when you get to your compass, think, does somebody ask people internally, or do they are they always looking outside for what they should be doing? And think Harvard Business Reviews, a lot of analysts will do this, right? They're always looking outside to see if, what they should be doing, and can be really careful, right, around the benchmarking, but there's obviously a need for it as well. You look internally too much, or so forth. So we're going to get into this and just explain it. But as you have your conversations with your team, you're going to ask them to, or your interview panel, you're going to get them to make sure they're listening for at least all 5 of these as they're going through their interview. And we'll get to their roles and everything else as we move forward. But these 5 are really, really, really important. It's more important to know what you are as a team, right? Or yourself. If you're individually expanding a team, or if you're hiring a team, you really have to know what your metric is for each of these as well. So it's good for you to go back and think about it yourself. And sometimes you can ask a friend, right? If you might think you're really constant, really, dynamic or variable. That's when you were the most successful. And then you have to go speak with somebody else. You realize that that's not the case, right? It was during a time of speed. I think back to a software company I was at for a long time, and the pace at times was very constant. It was fast, but it was very constant. At other times, it was very bumpy, changing, new launches, new pandemics or new recessions at that time. But when was the success of certain companies, and when do the companies get stronger and move forward, and when do they get more stronger, right? And you have to really think about that. And same thing with when you move into the pod, when you're interviewing somebody, think about, were they like Tiger Woods? Great. But Tiger still needs a team around Tiger Woods, right? Or Serena, right? Who are they like? Or were they and Michael Jordan? A lot of people might not think he was, but he was only successful because he played in a group. There is no one person NBA team, right? So it's interesting. You got to think about it yourself when you go through this. So just make sure you go through it as yourself and think about each of these positions and look at your TriMetrics report if you want, right? that we have in front of you. And it teaches you all this, but you have to understand that yourself before you go. And then you have to understand, what stage are you hiring for? And this is so important. Is it launching, cruising, or are you porting? Are you at port? Your second act, right? Like, is that where you're at? But you have to understand the differences of all three when you decide you're going to go hire somebody. Because if you go hire somebody and you think that you're at cruise, and somebody comes in and says, you're not at cruise because we haven't launched, or vice versa. Somebody comes in and thinks that maybe they're at port, right? They've already launched, they've a cruise, they've got something going. Now they're establishing a second act, a revenue stream, a new initiative. And now they have to go through this. So that's, just make sure you understand the difference as a team. You understand the difference, but as well, when you're interviewing, that you know what that difference really is. Because there's a lot of turbulence differences between them. At launch, you're going to see a lot of unknown variables first time, right? Cruising, different. Port, you actually don't expect any turbulence. But go back to cruise for a second. With cruise, turbulence can come. You could be on a cruise, for example, and monster waves could be hitting it. You're going through, Gulf of Mexico or something. It's supposed to be rough. And so if that's the case, your captains know. They can predict it. They're going to hit it head on. They're not going to hit it from the side. They're going to try to avoid it if they can, right? Port is different. There is no turbulence. You're sitting there, you're not moving. If a storm comes, bring the ships out, anchor them down, whatever the case may be. But you expect it, at least. You know exactly what's coming. You might not like it, but you expect it. A little bit different. And you're really assessing the damage when you come into port of what happened. You're taking barnacles off the bottom of the boat or whatever it is, but you're assessing the damage. Last storm, did we break something? Did we lose something? In this case, it happens in companies too. Are there people, right? What turbulence, what damage do we have? And then you got to plan for that next launch before you go back. So make sure you know what stage you're at when you're going to build out your team before you move on. And then you may go through your list and realize that you have some gaps within your leadership team or yourself of things that you need for a stage that you maybe have never been through. Maybe it's cruising. Maybe you've launched something really well. Now you've got to learn how to systemize and standardize and cruise and optimize. A little bit different, right? And so just know, or maybe you're in a time that you've never seen before. You have to bring somebody in that knows how to react in a time like this. Or maybe it's just, you need a compass to look internally. Everybody seems to be looking outward, and we need to bring somebody in that really knows how to assess our people effectively, right? But then the third stage, you're going to have to prepare for the interview. And preparing for the interview is really, what's your nucleus? Is it culture? Is it problems? What is it? In this case, we'll take a problem and we do our 2x2. See over measure, solve over maintain, right? And then can the person see the problem? Can they measure the problem? Can they solve the problem? Can they maintain the problem? That's how we're interviewing for a problem solver. That's how we're going to do a 4-in-1. But more importantly, how do they communicate? That's the one, right? At each stage. We have to know that. And then we have to build our team. We're going to go build our team. And it's going to be great, right? Because now we know how to interview. We have a nucleus. We have to ask a lot of questions before we start interviewing. And that is, what is the job? We only need one person to check. Does the person know how to do the job? Well, you're going to have a check here as well. But, we need to make sure that somebody knows at what pace this person has been successful. You have to know if somebody understands, are they going to come in and help our culture? Are we all in agreement on what our culture has to change in order to handle this next stage, right? Lots of things have to be asked as you go build your team and as you panel your team, but make sure you ask at least these questions. Can we support this initiative, right? We have to understand what the person will do in the interview if we are going to know if we can even support it, right? Know that. Hopefully you're not wasting anyone's time. You'd figure that out beforehand. But again, then you assign your roles. You got your culture checkers, you have your stress testers, but you assign your roles throughout your team and you figure out what you actually really need. But you got to make sure you always have your checks. The microphone check one, check two. You need some people in there that come in and audit the most important things for you to know. And then you take your three, your gaps, your stage, and your nucleus, and you build out your plan. And you interview. That's the best part of it. Now, there's three things that you really have to measure when someone's interviewing. You got a panel, first of all. Hopefully you interview as a team. That's the fourth thing I guess I should probably mention. Try to interview at least in groups at times, okay? But make sure that you focus on when you listen to the stories. Tell us a story, right? Tell us a story about a time where you've recognized a problem, if you're interviewing a problem solver. But know that there are things, interview as a team, and it'll help your candidates as well to see who, dynamics of rooms and so forth, but listen for a successful learning path. Meaning, give you an example of where there was a problem, you learned something, you executed. And successful means, definition of a successful learning path is you get through all 5 stages, right? You want to learn how, but you get to execute. So you take your knowledge and you've executed it and proven it, right? Great question is, how do you know you're successful? But then you have to know what your needs are. Now, a lot of boards and a lot of teams, when they interview, they miss this step, and sometimes it causes a big problem. And that is, are we interviewing based off what somebody we believe can do this because we know that they understand the information, they've gone to school or they've been in this environment, we know they understand it. But all we need to know is that they could test for it. So we'll interview based off questions. Do you understand this process? Do you know it? Or do you have to interview based off of getting to execute, like a situation where, an experience, right? Do you have to interview based off test or of execute? What stage of learning do you have to interview for? And a lot of people don't even know how to interview for execute, right? So give me an example of how you executed, because unless you've done it before, it's really hard to understand if it was correct or not. Unless, interview properly to listen for certain success. But the last thing is your communication alignment. You have to make sure that your teams like the way the person communicates, because everybody has different communication preference. And so they have to be like, how is this person communicate? And one person like, oh, they're really kind, they're thoughtful of others. Another person's like, very logical. There's a process here. Another person, may say something else. But make sure that as a team, you assess the communication. Did you like the way the person communicated? Make sure you're unanimous in that. And then if you're not, as a leadership team, discuss it before proceeding. If somebody really doesn't like someone's leadership, then don't move forward with it, right? So just think about that, right? And then just score it up, put up the scoreboard, you're done. It's it. It's simple as this. These 3 things, knowing what those 5 paces are, pace, pod, variable, what they're, how they do the validation and check, what launch they're in, so forth, right? That's what you're going for, right? But then you build out your nucleus. If you need somebody come fix your culture, interview for culture. Can they see a culture? Can they measure it? Do they know how to solve? And then after they left, was it sustainable? Did it maintain? Then figure out how they communicate at each stage. But build out your interview based off this process, and you're going to be successful. And that's it. So, any questions?